Hello everybody and welcome to Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you guys are looking for PTC geocodes, including the latest set Evolving Skies, make sure you check out the Potown store where you can use Omnipoke for a discount on your order. Today, Joe and I are back for the second week of the post-rotation tournament sort of analysis videos that we like to do after the first few weeks after a new set's released. We had some pretty interesting results last week, and I think the format's starting to settle down here. We're starting to see a few decks coming up that are doing, or really seem to be doing better than the rest, which is interesting. This usually happens, but I'm not sure it was quite the decks I was expecting. So yeah, I think we've got, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 different tournaments to look at tonight. So yeah, going to be an interesting one. Kicking things off with Zacian's Late Night Series number 6. This is actually one of the bigger tournaments these days now, so it's always a good one to get some perspective on. And Sylveon was the eventual winner of this tournament. You'll start to see this deck pop up quite frequently, I think. But yeah, Sylveon already doing pretty big things.
Yeah, I think there's really two kind of builds. There's this build which is pure special energy, which it's really happy that Shadow Rider's gone down in play a lot, because you would just scoop, right, otherwise,
yep.
Unless you got your turn 1 Rapid Strike down onto a Blaziken or even a Sylveon. Yeah, you're happy to see Shadow Rider go down in play. So you don't need to play the Moltres package necessarily right now. It can still help against Dragapult, but here you're just trying to have the type coverage of Psychic type coverage, Fighting, and Fire. Zeraora being a big sniper as well, potentially with the telescopic sight, you do a really decent chunk into things. This list is playing none of the Ribbon Badge, which is kind of surprising. Ribbon Badge can be gotten around by a few decks, especially with the amount of Inteleon pings around. I don't actually know how relevant that badge actually is, so maybe telescopic becomes more relevant, but essentially we're seeing that a deck that can just fight on all fronts with the multitude of type coverages and a bit of sniping in there is just good right now. And yeah, it's proving consistent enough. I think that was the main question mark around Sylveon, really. We all knew that it could be this type coverage toolbox, but it turns out like Dream, Gift, and Octillery is enough of a package to get into most games. So yeah, it seems to be doing very well right now, and this won't be the only Sylveon that we look at today, because they're all slightly different here and there.
Yeah, it's that nature of being like a boxy deck, right? You can kind of, like 50 or so cards are pretty much solidified, I feel, in the list now. But then you've got, space here and there. Eldegoss is one that I haven't seen too much recently, so that's pretty cool to see. Again, it's just another flavour to boost Sylveon's damage, as well as just getting key supporters back. But yeah, really interesting to see the special energy build doing well. Like you say, there's two main sort of trains of thought with the deck, and I think this is probably the less popular one, so good to see it still doing well. And like you say, this proves that Sylveon can perform if there's multiple different builds of this kind of deck doing well. So yeah, really cool to see Zeraora in the spotlight as well. It was a card that Joe and I were both quite excited about, and it kind of flopped when Chilling Reign came out, so cool to see it in another form, which is pretty nice to see.
And Octillery can scout out the Echoing Horn as well, which is cool. So it has that late game finish option with a telescopic and Eldegoss boss plays. So that's a kind of spicy option for that list specifically. Pretty
nice. Dragapult was the second place list, and again another deck that's kind of proved that it wasn't just a one-time thing, that it maybe is here to stay, which is interesting. I don't know exact win rates. Unfortunately, Trainer Hill hasn't updated with the post-rotation stuff, but it wouldn't surprise me to see Dragapult with a higher win rate than Shadow Rider at the moment, which is, I think, something that not very many people expected going into this format, so that's pretty impressive. Again, nothing too crazy about this list. We've got the usual suspects along with Hammer, Path, Tool Jammer, just kind of trying to slow other decks down because your damage output is slightly weaker than other decks. You need to really... maybe you need an extra turn or whatever, so things like Hammer, Path, and Tool Jammer really trying to just rein other decks in. But yeah, we're going to see a lot of Dragapult over the video as well, because it's still proving to be pretty good. I think I'm still not convinced that this will be a mainstay, but I think one more week of this and I'll kind of be convinced that this is here to stay. I still feel like there's going to be awkward matchups around there, and I think one thing that scares me a bit is Single Strike is was doing well at the end of last week, and it's just going up in popularity right now. It is, you'll see towards the end of this week, it is like most played deck in some tournaments, which is crazy. And Dragapult really does not like that matchup. As long as they can find basically any Umbreon, Dragapult really struggles. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to see. But Dragapult still looks like it can be a pretty good piece of the puzzle that is the post-rotation metagame, being able to deal with Sobbles and all of that stuff quite nicely, as well as pretty good, pretty crippling for certain engines. So yeah, looks like it's here to stay. Interestingly, with this list, there's only one quick ball, which does make me wince a little bit. Obviously, yes.
That's the hammers, right? That's the spaces you cut into. I think you can get away with 3. I really don't like 1, personally. And it's not even playing any Shelly dealing intel, it's just playing quick shooters. And I think that's usually like a one-of that I like to see in the deck. It just gives you so many more outs in the later stages from Marnie.
Yeah.
But Crushing Hammer, just like you said, gives you outs. It makes that single strike a little bit more winnable because you can hunt down the Houndours so easily that as long as you flip heads. I personally prefer Fan of Waves because it's a guaranteed removal for one thing and it's less spaces.
Yeah.
But I still think this is a relatively normal core, and I know some of the other content creators did post Crushing Hammer lists, so it doesn't surprise me that they've started to become a little bit more popular.
Yeah.
Because there's been a lot of posts about it.
Yeah, it makes sense. Jolteon, again, is another one that's proved that it's here to stay. This top 4 is actually very representative of basically the rest of this week's meta, which is pretty funny. Jolteon, again, at the end of last week was doing really well and is still doing very well this week. Again, there's nothing too crazy about this list. It just looks to be kind of getting into the game. I think the 1 Cheryl count is pretty much standard now. I think initially some people thought it might be a bit of a tech here and there, but I think it's pretty standard these days, with some lists even pushing up to 2 just because for things like Mirror and Dragapult it is just so strong. It really sets them behind a lot of turns. I'm still not convinced on the Lucky Match Chatot, but hey, that's me, I guess.
I mean, he's up to Katron's up to 4 nets now, so he's really trying to spam the Chatot. If he has to.
He does. He does want the he does want that Lucky Match ability going off. But yeah, it looks to be still a very solid piece of the metagame. Like we said last week, being able to draw with your energy and being able to set up a very, very an attacker with so much tempo, basically 1 attachment and a badge is from nowhere. You're doing 200 on the board a lot of the time. Is pretty scary. Obviously, there will be certain situations where it can be difficult. I still think most of the fighting matchups are going to prove difficult because you can't really race them very well. You're looking to deal with their bench. And things like Rapid Strike and Single Strike can just kind of get one out and just really feast on you because you can't ever get through that barrier of like 300 HP particularly quickly. But other than that, I actually do still really like Jolteon's matchup spread, and Ludicolo Suicune is still I feel like it's dropped dropped in play a fair bit, but it's still out there and still a very relevant deck. So still having that as basically a very, very free matchup is nice as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that Single Strike, the next deck that we'll come on to, is probably one of the best answers to both the Dragapult and the Jolteon. So it's playing those 2 type coverages very well. And the list can't really change now, even though I've showed us a really great shell, and I think that's like 58 cards guaranteed straight away. Yeah. This is playing Scrapper and Jammer, and it's actually thrown in a cape. It's kind of weird, 1 cape, because this deck doesn't have the most robust draw engine. You're just relying on supporters and your tower to help you. And it's only playing 1 Crobat as well, so you don't have much push potential for these cards. It kind of makes me like the Scrapper Jammer combo, because Jammer as the one-of feels like you dig for it a lot whenever you play this deck. So I don't mind doubling up those counts, but I don't think Cape and Jammer as one-ofs makes too much sense. I'd try and steal a space back in this list and go to like double Jammer probably. This list is playing no air balloons, it's just playing 2 copies of Switch as well, which again can be punished quite aggressively. I think because you're panic drawing a lot of situations, you have to put your Vs down onto the board proactively a lot more often, which can give people Boss's Orders options. But I really like Single Strike. I've been testing it a lot this last week. I like its place in the meta because you can 2-prize trade into Suicune matchups. You can hit for weakness on Draga and Jolteon. So there's a lot to like here. And you can see people are trying to wiggle around with those like last 2 or 3 spots, but that's really down to personal preference, I think. The shell is just very reasonable in general for what it can churn out in the game right now.
Yeah, there was a time where Single Strike was just not very it was inconsistent. It wasn't able to keep up with basically ADP. Even when you had a fairly good ADP, they were able to just keep pushing Zacians and stuff at you. But even that matchup nowadays is fine because we have ways around the Zamazenta. We can very fairly trade with the Zacians. I think Single Strike is in a fantastic place right now, and towards the latter end of this week's tournaments, it was the most played deck in at least this week's Sunday Open and stuff. So clearly, a lot of people are respecting it as well.
For sure.
We had. I'm going to check out. Whoops! I'm going to check out this Sylveon list real quick just to see whether it is the other build. Looks like it is indeed the other build. This is the sort of the more stripped back Moltres style build, and then the ribbon badges and that kind of stuff. This is kind of like I say the other line of thinking when it comes to Sylveon trying to hit some other types for weakness. Which is obviously completely fair. It's pretty Dark is still a pretty good weakness to be hitting, especially with Dragapult still on the up. I have to think your Dragapult matchup is kind of okay anyway because Sylveon does more damage than Dragapult, but regardless, just kind of locking that in is also nice. And then just having such a good tempo attacker in Moltres anyway is very, very important. Being able to have access to like E-switches and combos off of the back of that as well is very nice. Like we said, the ribbon badges in this build as well, just to skew the prize trade here and there. But yeah, this is kind of the other way of building the deck, right?
Yeah, and the Great Balls offset the captures that you're not playing as well, so that's kind of the school of thought here.
Yeah.
If you are playing Darks, you need more ball search in general. But yeah, I think it's weird because Shadow Rider shouldn't be non-existent in the game. But there are good reasons to not be playing Shadow Rider. Like we said, Single Strike going way up in play right now as a horrible, horrible matchup for Shadow Rider. So there's not much of an opening for that deck. So if you're not worried about Shadow Rider, you can play the pure special build with Sylveon. Yeah,
feels like it hits more weaknesses, but has a bigger glaring weakness than that Shadow Rider matchup. But hey. Sure. And then in top 8, the last different list to look at is just a Rapid Strike Urshifu list. Rapid Strike's still in that weird position where it didn't break out of the format like everyone expected it to, and but it still feels like it's there. It's just kind of in the back burner. People still respect it. It's still hyper efficient, very, very good tempo. It still can do absolutely disgusting things with Gmax Rapid Flow and then Medichams and pings and this, that, and the other. But it's not been as groundbreaking as everyone thought because everyone was kind of ready for it, I think. So, but as you can see, it's still there, it's still lingering. Again, nothing crazy about this list. You've got the site, you've got the e-search, you've got basically pretty consistent counts of most things. The variety of different switch options I do quite like as well, just because this deck wants to move around so weirdly on the board. There's so many different situations where you need each of these cards, and it works in an Inteleon engine because you can just cherry pick the one you need, which is cool. But yeah, pretty interesting stuff. The Cheryl is another interesting one. I guess basically with some of these more two-shot decks coming out and no Shadow Rider anymore, there's only one deck that really one-shots you ever, and that's Sylveon. So all of a sudden Cheryl's value has gone right up. I guess Single Strike can one-shot you as well, but in general Cheryl's value has gone right up, so I don't mind the inclusion for that here, I guess as well.
Yeah, I actually think Urshifu is a super risky play right now. It's really weird that Shadow Rider and Urshi were touted to be some of the strongest decks, and we've basically just been too stubborn with the lists that we haven't changed them enough. I posted about Shadow Rider this week with a 2-prize attacking approach to be a little bit different, and I want to try some different approach with Urshifu because you still read the card and think there's way too much good here that it's not seeing any play whatsoever. There's a ton of psychic decks. Like Shadow Rider not being in the meta hasn't been an issue because there's Sylveon and Dragapult sort of replacing and gatekeeping that spot. So I think you do need to play Urshifu with some element of dark, and I think that's going to be my next sort of like exploration right now. Yeah. Because the card is too good to be having this low amount of success, I think. Yeah, it's really weird. It feels like, like you say, there is too much good about the archetype. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to explore. Rounding out top 8, there was indeed another
Single Strike, and then top 16 had a few other lists. So, like, we could go over all of these, but I'm sure we're going to see most of these in other top 8s anyway. So we will head over to the Australia Series 43, where, again, it was another Sylveon winning. Again, we'll just take a quick look just because it was a winning list. This was, again, really looking at a variety of different type coverages. We've got the Dark, we've got the Fighting, we've got the Psychic, and also the Fire and the Blaziken line. And yeah, again, this is kind of 50 or so cards of this list are pretty set in stone in this style of build, at least, and it's just adding those 10 cards based on what matchups you want to be hitting. This one's trying to hit them all because it's managed to squeeze in that 1/1 Urshifu as well, which is cool. I don't know how useful or useful it was on the day, but being able to, I guess, have that option is pretty cool. Just again, we've just said how strong the card is in a vacuum, so having access to Gmax Rapid Flow is pretty cool. There's no E-switches in this list though, which is something that is
really low Dark Energy count as well.
Yeah, there's only the 4 Dark Energy as well. So yeah, it's a weird one. It feels like this one is more focused on hitting the correct types rather than just being able to produce an attacker every turn. And in that same vein, that kind of then leads into why it makes sense to have the Urshifu, because you just want to be hitting for the right type. But at the same time, I'd love to see some E-switches in here just to be able to Gmax Rapid Flow out of nowhere, even just be able to attack with Sylveon out of nowhere. It feels like it's very, very important, especially when there are decks that can just blow you up right now, and also in terms of just falling behind on attachments. Moltres has always been fantastic at regaining that tempo and getting an extra attachment every turn, so being able to use that on anything other than a Moltres feels very important, I think.
Yeah, and they got the double path, even though it's playing like Kricketune and Moltres. It's basically, I feel like they just put this down when they face what's it called? Zacian Zama, right? They just Blaziken through people in that exact matchup, and it's almost like playing a Phoebe in that regard, because you put it down so few times in other matchups.
Yeah, I think so. Makes sense. So yeah, and you can see that it was up against another Sylveon in the final. We have a Dragapult and an Urshifu in the top 4 as well. So you can start to see we are developing a bit of a metagame here. The first new list to look at is the Zacian list, which was a Zacian Zamazenta, which again is nothing too interesting. It's nothing too new, but it is at least worth taking a look at. We have the Scrap account, which I think is pretty much standard now. A double Raihan is pretty interesting. I think it's like counts can be anywhere between 0 and 2, so leaning into the 2 Raihan is pretty cool. I do like Raihan in the deck, but it feels like the deck wants to boss so often that, or boss and Marnie basically so often that it did feel like sometimes Raihan was a luxury. But we have the Rotom Phone Guru package to maybe be able to smooth things out anyway. But yeah, other than that, this deck kind of feels like the new Luke Metal, right, where it's just playing lots of 4-ofs and being as consistent and as defensive as possible and just making people be honest with their decks and stuff like that.
Yeah, Raihan makes sense with the amount of Suicune and Single Strike that will both just 2-prize race you, so you just got to keep up and not with attachments, basically. So I don't mind that count at all, the way we are right now in the meta. Yeah,
makes sense. We had a Weezing Inteleon breaking into top 8 here, which is the first new deck of the day. Basically, it was pictures Weezing Inteleon, but I think one of the biggest stars of the show is Sableye here because it trades into the 3 prizes very well. And with Raihan, you can actually set these up out of nowhere, which is something that Sableye has basically always struggled with, right? It's never been able to produce attackers turn after turn. Realistically, you should only have to do it twice because you want to be taking 3 prizes with it. But now with Raihan, we can do that, and I know there has been a lot of talk about his archetype online recently, so I can see kind of why it's being tested out. I think Ability Lock is still somewhat relevant, but I don't think it's as relevant as people would necessarily think. I think there's a fair few decks that just kind of don't really care about the Weezing, which is a shame, but yeah, I don't like the list is just really weird, but it's cool to see it doing well, but I don't think this is necessarily something that will translate into it will be sticking around as like a mainstay archetype.
Yeah, it feels like a gimmicky build of just other better Inteleon lists, realistically. So yeah, I'm not like a huge fan of it, but it's definitely like a funky combination that has a lot of internal synergy. So it's fun to play, but there's more winning decks in the game for sure.
It will With Raihan, though, to be fair, it doesn't take much to be able to set up a VMAX KO, which is, again, something that something that basically the deck is somewhat always struggled with. Interestingly,
I was going to say there's so many two prizes right now, or decks that can play the true two prize game. Like the selling point was there in like the surprise opening weeks, but now the selling point is just like really not there unless you're facing exactly like Dragapult.
Interestingly, there is the first Suicune list we can have a look at. We won't look at this one, but there's still not been a Suicune in top 8 so far. So that's interesting because Suicune was like the big winner of week 1, I feel, or at least one of the big winners. And this wasn't even a Ludicolo build, so maybe the Ludicolo build was all a bit of a meme. We'll have to carry on investigating. But yeah, you can see rounding out top 16, there are a few more. There are a couple of Jolteons, a Desi still lingering, another G Weezing, and yeah, that's Suicune down at the bottom. Into Ice Tray 4, and we had a Dragapult Inteleon mirror in the final, which I dread to think how that matchup goes. That sounds like a complete headache, especially when the lists looked to be pretty similar. This list looks again very standard. Just looks to be
this is the hammer list, which is interesting.
Yeah, again, so this was the hammerless list, which is interesting. I wasn't sure whether the hammer list was the second place was hammerless, but if you're saying it was, that is very interesting because you'd think when a deck like Dragapult needs to find turn 1 attachment, that the hammer list would naturally be pretty favoured in terms of being able to out tempo people, but obviously being a flip card, there is always that element of chance to it, and I guess there's so much. I feel like there's also so much to this, right? If one misplaced Sobble in the mid game can lead to an extra prize here and there, and there's a lot to it.
Well, there's no doubt that the biggest coin flip will be the first one.
Yes.
Because you can deny an opponent's engine on turn 2, right? And that's the whole point of Draga.
Yeah.
So if one person just starts first, and obviously Darkrai fans list, the winning one, is more consistent to survive like Marnie's and probably get more Sobbles into play and that sort of thing. So
yeah,
even with a rogue hammer hitting heads, there is a Raihan in here, so you can catch up. But I would imagine that the second place list did flip more tails than heads in the final. Let's say that.
Yeah, I was going to say you have to assume. But yeah, like you say, it probably having 2 extra quick ball outs probably means that you do have an extra Sobble on turn 1, and all of a sudden that means you actually have access to a Drizzile on turn 2, and then you can actually play the game. So yeah, it feels like that's a pretty big thing. So yeah, third place was Jesse Parker's Suicune Ludicolo, so proving that maybe it isn't just a complete meme, though already we can see that the deck has kind of fallen off a little bit in terms of play. I feel like it's probably still just as popular. But yeah, this list, again, most of these lists still look pretty similar to week 1. I think there's not much space with this list, so there's not much room to play because you're playing 2 stage 2s. And even with one of them being a consistency stage 2, you still have to respect the fact that you're playing what looks to be a pretty clunky deck. So whilst you do have the natural draw of Suicune and Drizzile, you really can't take too many liberties with the deck, I don't feel. So I don't think we're going to see too much exploration with these lists from the future in future, really.
Yeah, I don't mind it too much. I just think that the amount of Jolteon and Dragapult sort of really detract from the strengths of the deck. You're constantly digging for more basics just to put them into play. You have to put them into play for damage in a lot of these situations, which is awkward. So yeah, and there aren't the easy VMAXs anymore. Like Shadow Rider was one of the feast decks for Suicune, and you just plow through that with no problems. And the metagame is now revolving around like acknowledging Suicune as one of the top decks. So the metagame is warping to make this less favorable. And this could have just been a genius metagame call, and it's actually not got the same amount of legs that we initially thought.
Yeah.
But Suicune's still like a huge, great package deal, and it'll still be doing quite well. But I think the Intel engine is just getting targeted so hard right now that it's suffering a little bit in that regard.
The other thing is, as we mentioned basically all video, is the fact that this metagame between 3 prizes and 2 prizes is developing, and all of a sudden if the metagame revolves around 2 prizes, the Ludicolos lose huge amounts of value. Because
or the 3 prizes in the game knock out the Lotad, right?
Yeah. So the 3 prizes knock out the Lotad, and against the 2 prizes you're playing 5 dead cards. So all of a sudden you're playing a less consistent like Inteleon Suicune. So yeah, it feels like like you say, maybe Ludicolo is a meta call, and it's not actually. It just weaves in here and there when the time is right for it. But it looks to be like this build is definitely in a more difficult position than it was when, like you say, everyone was just hard playing Shadow Rider and Rapid Strike because they were touted as the best decks.
Speaking Jolteon, I'm telling you, it's the play. We've already profiled it. I think it's way stronger in the game than Suicune Ludicolo now that the meta's moved on a week, right? I'm telling you, it's broken.
I wanted to play it this week, but I couldn't get hold of Jolteon's. Maybe next week. Well,
I just feel like Lotad gets no value in the game anymore.
The way
the meta's gone. So
definitely. We have a Victini list rounding out in the top 8, which is pretty interesting. We haven't seen too much Victini. We looked at 1 or 2 lists maybe last week. This one again, kind of that quad build with a 1/1 Altaria. Again, you really have to question how accessible that 1/1 Altaria is, because it feels like you need to be spending your ball search on just staying in the game, because Suicunes and Zacians and even single strike Urshifus are really putting pressure on you on turn 2, especially if you're going second. So I'm still not super convinced as to how useful or how accessible the Altaria is, but it feels like if you naturally draw into it, you've got to assume your win rate goes up very, very nicely. It feels like this one of the old Greens decks where basically if you can just stay in the game, you can hopefully be consistent and stuff. But again, it feels like I'm still not convinced that this is the way to play Victini, or even necessarily just a deck in general. But it looks to still it's weird. It feels like it can struggle with some of the Oko decks, but now that's basically dropped back to exactly single strike that it would struggle with here. Suicune, because
right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, Suicune, but Suicune's Oko VMAX decks.
Sure.
But yeah, so this is an interesting one. I don't think we see too much more of it throughout the rest of the tournaments either. So
I wanted to profile this last week, and the games I had, it had a pretty decent going first win rate, but its going second win rate is abysmal. And like you said, I feel like you can only search out Swablu when you're a player going first, because you know that the Victini that you started with, you can just spend your quick ball, attach to your active, make a Swablu. But when you go second, you always have to attach to a Victini on the bench, right? Or you just hope they don't have it, or flip a heads on a hammer and then they don't have a play into you next turn. But yeah. Man, it is a dicey deck to play when you're going second. I feel like you're just trying to be tempo, Marnie hit, and that's where your wins come from. But there's a lot of decks that do that in the game already with better engines.
Yeah, so. It's a weird one. Even though Suicune has dropped in popularity a little bit as well, I felt like another big selling point of this deck was just the fact that Zacian Zamazenta in the first 2 weeks was hugely popular, and even that now has dropped out. So it feels like it's even lost one of its good matchups, and I wouldn't even say it's top 5 most played anymore. So it feels like there's not much reason to be playing this kind of build at the moment, but pretty interesting regardless. And then rounding out top 16, we had another Galarian Weezing. We had a Leafeon in there as well. We actually see the first Shadow Rider, I believe, of any top 16 so far. So yeah, that one is pretty interesting. Chill Series was the biggest tournament of the week with over 500 players, I believe. And again, it was a Sylveon that won. I think Sylveon won 50% of the 100-player or above tournaments this week. Taking a quick look at the list, again, this is that dark-based build with 7, the particularly high count of 7 darks. Yeah. And then just the Blazikins as their tech of choice. They've swapped the Blaziken and the Urshifu lines around from that other list, which I actually don't mind at the moment because, like we say, it feels like Zacian has really dropped off a little bit over the past few weeks or few days. So kind of leaning less on that. Makes more sense, I think. But yeah, nothing, again, too spicy. I'm still somewhat uncomfortable with the amount of one-offs in a deck like this where you can't tutor basically anything other than with Raihan. So, I mean, I guess you have Dream Gift, right? But you basically always Dream Gift for Ribbon Badge, I feel, just to... well, not always, but a lot of the time you're going to
normally go Incense, right? I think that's always the main target.
Yeah. But yeah...
I really like the double right hand, the 1 energy search means that you can really play into this Moltres game when you have to. I think this list should have a really good Drago matchup. Whereas some of the Sylveons, I think they can fall to Drago here and there. because they're so reliant on that one Remoraid that they develop and that sort of thing. But you can just end your turn. You can spend your opening ball search on Moltres, and then you can use Sylveon to end your turn, just getting an E-search just to maintain your attachments in that matchup. So this heavy Dark Energy approach plus E-search is really good for Dragapult. So if you're expecting that still to be big, I really like this approach. I think it's the favorite Sylveon build that I've seen so far.
Yeah. Again, this is just complete type toolbox, and it looks to be still in a pretty good spot. It feels like it's less so Sylveon pulling its weight and more just the archetype of being able to hit for weakness, which is basically what everyone predicted pre-rotation, right? That post-rotation was just going to be whoever can hit ×2 on more things. And it feels like Sylveon is just the leader of that pack. But in general, you're just seeing a lot of these lists doing well because they're able to hit exactly what they want for weakness. We do have a Shadow Rider list to look at, which is, like I say, the first one we're taking a look at of the day. This is a double Alcremie list, so pretty much this. In fact, this looks almost identical to some of the earliest we saw pre-rotation. Nothing spicy, no bells and whistles. Right? This is just hyper consistent, trying to get horses into play and draw lots of cards and make sure you have enough energy here and there. It feels like there really is nothing to say about this, to be honest. It's just very, very strong in terms of the way it's built. It's just whether it seems to really be struggling where it is in the metagame right now. Basically, I feel like Umbreon is one of the biggest things keeping it out, as well as these Sylveonists playing. Moltres look to be pretty dicey as well. So
yeah, it lost to 3 Sylveons out of its 4 losses, and the other one was single strike. So that spells bad news that if your Sylveon matchups are that bad, most people are still playing the dark builds, obviously. But again, I'm just going to preach to play the Necrozma 2 prize list. I mean, it doesn't have to be the list that we built or whatever, but I think trying to just bang your head against the wall and stubbornly still play the 60 that we've seen from pre-rotation just doesn't make sense in the meta. So if you want to take the punt on Shadow Rider, I definitely think a 2 prize attacking list makes way more sense for me right now.
It's interesting because we mentioned earlier on how most decks are just trying to Marnie and attack, and it feels like this deck is the best at getting out of Marnie because you just draw so many more cards than everyone. So it feels like...
I mean, they're Marnieing you with 4 Path in the deck as well.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the problem.
Yeah. But yeah, I also really like the Necrozma build. I think it's the 2 prize answer. We saw Necrozma working as a 2 prize answer pre-rotation, and it feels like everyone just forgot about it post-rotation. So yeah.
There's reasons to not be playing the deck anyway, though, because there's so much single strike. But I'm saying if I was to play Shadow Rider for any tournament, there's no way I'd be playing how we've seen it before. There's too many 3 prizes in your deck. It's just a big problem. And I also really like Suicune in the deck because there's so much healing. There's so much bench damage as win condition decks. Suicune as a one-of is super good right now. It's like a selling point of Shadow Rider for me, which is quite sad.
We have the 8th place Suicune list, which is actually not the Ludicolo build, so we'll take a quick look at this because it's got that 1/1 Ice Rider in here. And then again, it's just leaning a little bit more into the Suicunes, into the Inteleons, though it's actually only playing 1 Drizzile more than the Ludicolo build. So I guess the extra support comes from traders, and we have to find a way of jamming in the 1/1 Alcremie and a Guru in here as well, which is pretty interesting. I'm not sure necessarily what the Guru synergy is. I guess just drawing cards. Why not? It's draw. I'm gonna say
general, right?
It's draw under Marnie. It's draw under Path. It's just more cards, I guess. But yeah, pretty interesting.
You can't disrupt me. I have game, which is just super good for Oranguru right now.
Yeah. Horn is something that I've seen creeping into a couple of Suicune lists that I've seen over the week on social media, which is interesting. Obviously, upping your damage count in general, just being an extra +20 for people trying to play around it is pretty cool. But also just being able to target things for 2 prizes rather than 3 prizes. We're talking about how how matchups are going kind of tempo-based 2 prizes at the moment. So sometimes opponents will try and just evolve their VMAXs and say, well, you can't deal with a VMAX, especially in your build, because you don't play the Ludicolo stuff. This kind of lets you get around that. You can go Horn, Boss, and KO 2 prizes from there, which is interesting. I'm not hyper convinced on it, but
I was going to say, there's a cool play you can do against Sylveon and force two of the same type into play so they can't kill your Suicune. Which is I think it's actually partly in there for that.
Yeah. I can see that being, especially when it's the useless stuff. Even stuff like Blazikins, will ditch all of those. All of a sudden, that's basically a very easy 2 prizes at some point. So yeah, it's weird. Ice Rider was another one that a lot of people kind of predicted to be very, very strong post rotation, and it hasn't not been strong, but it's not been anywhere near as strong as people expected because, essentially because Suicune is a basic Pokemon that is just doing as much damage, and you don't have to put in the effort of evolving into an Ice Rider. It'll be interesting to see whether these Ice Rider counts start to go up now that Zacian Zamazenta has dropped out of favour. I think that's initially why it really wasn't seeing much play, because basically it was a 3-prize Suicune, so you might as well have just played Suicune because you were doing just as much with it, but you weren't giving up a prize. But now Zacian Zamazenta seems to be falling out of favour a little bit. I think a lot of people played that in the early weeks, in the early days, partly because accessibility, but partly because it was very, very linear in what it was doing. It was, like I say, it was keeping people honest because it was just doing the same thing every turn and trying to produce a tempo attack every turn. Now the format has started to develop and people have started to get comfortable with other decks. That's why I feel like Zacian Zamazenta has really started to deflate in popularity. And because of that, maybe that does mean Ice Rider can come back in and try and be a chunky Suicune. So it's weird. There's kind of reasons to not play it because it's not a basic, but the reasons to play it are that it doesn't die to all of these 2 prizes and you can actually double dip sometimes and trade 4 for 3. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that lines up.
Where we are at the moment, I prefer it to Ludicolo, I think. Mm-hmm. Even if it is a 1-1 or 2-2. I think it makes more sense for where we are right now.
Yeah, I think I agree. So yeah, rounding out top 16, again, nothing too similar. We really are starting to see a lot of the familiar faces here, though. We've got Dragapults, we've got Jolteons, we've got Urshifus, we've got Sylveons. Basically, that did round out the whole of top 16, those 4 archetypes, 2 of each. So yeah, that's pretty funny. Australia 44 and Catron is back with, this time, not Jolteon, but indeed Sylveon. So he's maybe hung up his Jolteon cards for now, and he's trying to break something else. And this time, again, it seemed to be pretty similar, though, to most of these builds. He is playing 4 Crushing Hammer, though. He did manage to weave those in, which is impressive, considering I think, in my mind, Sylveon still seems like one of the brickier decks of the format. So shoehorning 4 Crushing Hammer in is impressive, to be honest, and still taking down a tournament. Again, that kind of shows the power of Crushing Hammer, I guess. It can just win matchups because you go second, but you get to attach quote-unquote first, and you get to attack first and stuff like that, which is,
It's so interesting to me when you play Rapid Strike Surge. Why would you not just play 1 fan and then, double up on your Urshifu or Blaziken, whichever one you think is more important? Because you're playing...
Or even just play 4 counts of Great Ball and Evolution incense and stuff that. It's just...
Yeah. But Catron, I remember when Catron he's played a lot of other decks where he walks this tightrope of, slightly awkward consistency to play these Power Spike cards. I know he has, a super different philosophy to both of us as a deck builder. And obviously it works.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I think we both look at this and cringe, but obviously Catron is so effective in these online tournaments right now. He's been in such a good reign of form.
Yeah.
He's really got a good grip of this meta.
Definitely. I think this is the 5th or 6th time we've looked at one of his lists in the 2 weeks that we've done these videos. So, yeah, like you say, he really has got a grip of this format, which is great to see. It's always good when someone takes format by the horns and really does well with it. So, yeah. But yeah, I think, basically it's the same as everything, right? You have 56 cards here. You can either play 4 Crushing Hammers or you can take them out and play 4 other cards, i.e. for us it would be things like Evo Incense and Great Ball and stuff like that. But, it shows that, again, at least 50 cards of the Sylveon deck are pretty much locked in, and then the 10 really are flexible at the end. And that just shows to me that it is a very solid archetype. It doesn't really... it doesn't matter what the last 10 cards are, but to some extent it doesn't really matter what the last 10 cards are because, as long as you're able to hit the right thing for the right weakness and do it in enough games to have a positive win rate, actually get set up in more games than not, you're going to be doing well. So yeah, Props to Catron for doing it once again. Leafeon coming in second. This is the first Leafeon list we get to take a look at. Again, nothing too spicy here. Got the Inteleon engine, got the Crobat and the Leafeons, and that's basically just, cookie cutter, trying to keep it as consistent as possible. The Phoebe is interesting. Basically, again, I feel like there's not many Phoebe targets out there right now. So I don't know necessarily what it was for, outside of if they were just playing it in case of things like Zacian, in case of like Zamazenta.
They played against 3, yeah.
Okay, so I guess it was worth it.
Against 3.
Okay.
Leafeon is horrendous. Like, the regular V is horrendous into that matchup.
Yeah.
Because it's 90 base and you're coin flipping. So I think Phoebe makes sense. Even with the few that there actually are out there, I think obviously it got value for this player in the tournament. But I can definitely seeing it being a one-off because it is just like a 0%er otherwise.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe even if it's not particularly popular, you just have to play it to not insta lose.
Yeah,
which makes sense.
I feel like you could play like a third quick shooting over the Phoebe, and then you're really just like trying to force those to grow up as quickly as possible and have a chance. But
even so, that sounds.
And I think the Ornery Rod is like the only standout card for me that's not really like common. Normally, you just see the 4th capture or the 6th grass energy.
Yeah, the energy split was.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fine.
The energy split is one that slightly concerns me a little bit. There is the E-search in there as well. Yeah. On both counts. On both counts.
I really like Leafeon in the meta, by the way. I think it's one of the best punishers of single strike, which is on a huge uptick at the moment. And I don't think it's worried about many of these other matchups. So I actually low-key think that we'll see a bit of an uptick in Leafeon in this next coming week. So I think it's like great in the meta right now.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, there are a couple of things that I would toy around with. Like I say, I feel like one of the biggest selling points of Leafeon is the fact you get to capture turn 1 and not waste your energy. So I'd want to lean into that. 5
cells is the most important part of the deck, so you play for capture. That's like the first thing on my deck list, I think, if I'm playing Leafeon.
Yeah, the 5 grass I can't really argue with, but I would just personally like to see a 6th. But again, like E-search is kind of a 6th grass, right? And it's searchable, so I can't.
I think 9 has been the count for a lot of the Leafeon players.
Yeah.
With the E-search, so one or the other, but I think capture is too good to not play.
Definitely. And the other thing is the other thing I'd need to toy around with is that Phoebe count and whether one Phoebe win, because Phoebe's always been a card for me where it's like Phoebe and Power Pad or neither, and I don't know, like maybe obviously in this instance one Phoebe was enough, but I would need to see whether one Phoebe was enough to win that matchup or whether you did need to double dip on Power, because it feels like you still have to go through one Zamazenta somehow, and it, like even having to go through one Zamazenta looks really tough.
I mean, with Phoebe and mine, you can hit them pretty hard.
Oh yeah, I know, but like, so you Phoebe mine kill one, but then you like in that matchup, if they just develop another one, it feels like it's still going to be very difficult without a Power Pad to do the same again.
Sure. I mean, the hope is that it takes them way longer to build up a Zamazenta than a Zacian, and they still have to put Zacian into play just to Intrepid Sword so much. Like the amount I've played that deck enough times to know that even like you always put down one Zacian, and sometimes you put down the second just to draw you cards.
Yeah.
So I think you just hope quick shots can like get you over the line, and maybe you do have to flip some coins with the Leafeon.
Yeah.
You know.
Even so, though, still looks pretty interesting, to be honest.
Yeah, I really like Leafeon. I think it's underplayed right now. I think it's really good.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm just going to take a quick look at this Ice Rider list because it looks to be a bit of a thicker Ice Rider. Okay, yeah. This is a list that I actually played against today, which it was very similar to this, where it was like thick Ice Rider, and then the Inteleon engine, but then also squeezing in a 1/1 Frostlass, which is pretty interesting. Frostlass Ice Rider was something that I never got to test like pre-rotation. I didn't think it was particularly good, but I didn't think anyone had explored it enough to completely write it off, because it feels like very quickly Inteleon was picked up as the partner. And there was a lot of reasons to be playing Inteleon over Frostlass, but it is cool. So I'm pretty happy to see a 1/1 Frostlass squeeze in here, because I think it's pretty cheeky. I don't think, again, it's necessarily the way to play, but I do think it gives you a lot of burst potential, especially being able to attach Frostlass boss rather than it means that you don't get trapped behind Melanie, which sometimes felt like an issue with the deck.
Sure.
You had to play it, and you had to just hope that they were promoting something for you to KO, or they weren't able to KO you, so you could eventually punch through their VMAX or whatever. Being able to squeeze that 1/1 line in is pretty cool. And again, if they're like bossing up a snow run or whatever, that's really again going to be skewing their prize trade, which is nice. So again, even in that kind of just threatening scenario, it still looks to be pretty good. Again, all of these one-offs kind of lend themselves to an intelligent engine. The Cape of Toughness, I still think is I'm so flip-floppy with Cape of Toughness right now because it feels like everyone's playing these 2 prize decks that are also playing the Tool Jammer, but you have to play it because any deck that can't find Tool Jammer, you just gain so much tempo because again you can probably double dip with your Suicune. So it's one of those cards that feels like you have to play it just in case you can get use out of it, which is why I guess the 1 count doesn't hurt too much because you're not leaning into it or anything, and it's accessible with Inteleon and stuff. So yeah, but pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, I don't mind it. One bugbear of mine is I would always play for Melanie in a Melanie deck because Suicune turn 2 pop off potential, or like going second pop off potential is just so good. It wins you like so many games. Just putting like 80 or 100 damage into play is just like the biggest high roll in the game right now. So I would always put 4 Melanie in my list, but otherwise it looks cool. And like we said, there's a window for Ice Rider again to be safe enough. So I don't mind the small transition over to that route. Makes
sense. Shout if there are any lists you know of, Joe. But the next one I'm going to take a look at is the Victini and Inteleon list because this looks to be
it's a Suicune Victini.
Yeah. So essentially, it's the a long time ago, a lot of people were kind of discussing the concept of Melanie being able to Melanie onto a Victini. This can do that, but it kind of does it in the opposite way, in the opposite vein, in that we're actually a Suicune deck with we've squeezed in a Victini line in here, which is Victini's a really interesting one because it trades with the 2 prizes really well because it does that 220 damage you need to be doing, and in combination with the quick shooting, you can get around the like 230 HP stuff here and there. So that's pretty interesting. And then in the other 2 prize matchups, and even in the 3 prize matchups, you have Suicune to kind of be up trading if you're not able to go for the Victini stuff. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't think we've seen too much of this since. I did see someone playing it to a fairly high finish today, I believe. But yeah, in general, I don't know whether this is sticking around. This feels like somewhat similar in engine, at least, to the Suicune Jolteon list we profiled this week, in that you have that same kind of core. I want to say like 45 cards ish, maybe even 50, and then you're just playing one of these tempo 3 prizes that will hopefully clean stuff up here and there.
Yeah, I don't know if Victini's like that warranted. I would prefer other options, but yeah, there's some benefits, like you said. Max victories a good number into people trying to stay the 2 prize route into you. Obviously, you can't do it into the Suicune, which is one of the main 2 prizes. But yeah, I guess it helps against obviously Zacian knocking out, and even Zamazenta with the regular Victini V. So yeah, I think that sometimes can be a problem for the Suicune builds. You're forced to Ludicolo in a lot of those situations just to get through Zacians because they play such low bench. So this is another way around that.
Yeah. And then rounding out top 16 again, it was the usual suspects. There was a couple of Leafeons, so already maybe people were starting to pick up on that Leafeon thing with 3 making top 16. A couple of Urshis here and there. But yeah, onto the Yosefi Thursday Madness, and we had a Jolteon rounding out, finishing first in this one. Again, pretty similar. There was no happy match this time, unfortunately.
That's only Katron. I think only Katron plays happy match.
I think there was a couple of other people playing it in the exact tournament after that had basically just net decked his deck.
Sure.
But yeah, I think after exactly tournament 2 of Katron, after Katron won, I think that was his 3rd place list or something. I don't remember, but basically, I think from now on it's basically only been him. But yeah, again, pretty standard stuff. Like I say, the Cheryl seems to be pretty standard now. Still got the high scoop up net count. Scrappers there as well. I would imagine they're very important for Capes to be able to try and take out 4 prizes at once with the Jolteon, which is nice. And again, yeah, I think Jolteon in general. I think it would be. I would want to try it with Suicune, but Jolteon in general, if I had access to them, would really be one that I would be testing right now. It feels like it does very efficient damage. The thing that scares me is the fact that Single Strike is on the uptick, and that looks to be one of your tougher matchups, especially because they can go 2-prizer or 3-prizer, and if they go 3-prizer, like I say, you really don't have any way of being able to just hit into them and deal with them. You have to really, really play with their bench and try and win that way. So, yeah, looks to be... I think that's the only scary thing about Jolteon, but then, like we profiled on the channel this week, pairing it with Suicunes to just kind of do the tempo stuff in that matchup looks to be really cool. So,
just
yeah.
saying. Yeah. Outside of that, more of the same, really. I don't know. Maybe we should look at the Shadow Rider just to see, and it is just more of the same list.
Yeah, I was gonna take a look at the Umbreon Houndoom because I don't think that. Oh, okay, this is Umbreon Houndoom, but it has Single Strikes in there as well. So, it has a Scroll of Scorn though, bastard, and it's playing Piers
and Hiding Dark. So this is more Umbreon based.
Yeah. I guess that warrants the Umbreon Houndoom little tag that Limitless has given it. But yeah, again, you can start to see that a metagame is forming here with a lot of these decks, which is pretty similar. So yeah, moving into the Master Ball number 10. We had a couple of Suicunes at the top here. The Inteleon build beating out the Ludicolo build, which I said earlier on makes a lot of sense because in that matchup you're playing 5 pretty much dead cards. So yeah, I think this, again, we can kind of see, in fact I think this is basically a carbon copy of the list we looked at a few minutes ago with the Guru and stuff. But yeah, you can see that basically in that matchup, at least in the 2-prize matchups, the Ludicolo isn't really going to be worth its weight in paper, so you're going to come out sort of unfavoured into the 2-prize matchups where you can play all of your cards. Interesting to see what this Alcremie list is rounding out top 16. It looks like this was pure Alcremie, which is funny. Look at this list. This is incredible. We've got
my eyes are widening. Sorry.
We've got Turbo Alcremie with 4 Cruel Charge, which is something that, to be fair, a few people, including us, said we wanted to at least toy around with. I don't think anyone thought of playing Blissey or Mew in the deck though, so that's pretty wild. I can't think of anything that sticks out to me as to why they would be.
I guess you just, when you're that low on energy, like it's only playing Ordinary Rod and Quartz, so I guess it's like tempo whisks, and then like you're trying to like Blissey reload your energy, because it's not like you'd imagine they'd play like Energy Recycler if they were trying to like chain whisk sort of thing. Or they'd play like Scoop Up.
I guess there's no nets or anything as well.
Articunos.
Yeah.
So I think it's literally just trying to like front load, deal with the first threat, and then like catch up on other stuff. But there's a lot of wackiness going on there.
Yeah, I would be interested to see. What were the matchups like? Interesting. The matchup, a lot of interesting. The matchups were
beating some Sylveons.
Yeah. Sylveon's Dragapults. Interesting. Okay. But yeah, that was that's the top 16 list. Again, we're not going to go through each and every one of these. You can kind of see stuff that's sort of building around here. The Atlas 2K was, I think, one of the other big interesting ones, because this was there was a lot of money on the line, so a lot of people probably were really going for it in this tournament. You can see that there was a Single Strike. I think it's the first time a Single Strike has won this week. But it's been one of the most represented decks so far, so you can still see that it's very relevant. Again, it looks to be pretty similar to most lists. We have the Scroll of Scorn as the tech of choice in here, which is pretty cool. There have been certain situations when I've been playing this deck, to be fair, where I have felt like I've had to evolve into an Urshi just to stay alive, and because of that, the only way I can get a KO is with Gmax One Blow. So having the Scroll of Scorn, I actually don't dislike it too much, because it gives you that option of being able to Houndoom to another threat whilst still getting value out of the VMAX. The obvious point of contention is the fact that you have to find it exactly when you need it, and with no real tutorage or anything in this deck, it's really going to be hit and hope and attach it if you see it early, and if you lose value on it, oh dear. If you don't, then great news. But yeah, it's it's a really cool card. I just don't think you can ever find it consistently enough when you need it. So I don't know whether it's worth the spot in general.
Yeah, and I'm kind of surprised that a lot of the single strikes are actually cutting down their switch outs. I've normally been in the camp wanting more rather than less, and that's at like the 1 switch 2 balloon that Evenoff started out with.
Yeah.
So seeing a lot of lists just playing the 2 switch and cutting the balloon for other things is quite surprising to me personally. But
I guess there's a lot of jammer and a lot of scrapper right now, so maybe people are leaning into the switches more. But you'd want more. You'd still want more.
At least.
Yeah.
But
I would want to play less than 3. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure. You can see a couple of familiar names again. Katrin making top 4 with Jolteon. We've got some Suicune Ludicolos down there as well. I'm going to have a quick look at this Sizzle list as well, because what on earth is going on here? Sizzle VMAX. Remind me what this does. I think it's minus like 60.
Bronzong build. Yeah, so I'm not certain why this isn't just Corviknight, but yeah, it's a metal Bronzong deck basically, with the Cheryl going on.
Very interesting. I guess one of the biggest things that these kind of builds had to deal with in the past was stuff like Victini, and Victini is on a real low tick right now. So the only other thing that can one shot you is Single Strike, and Single Strike right now can't get through a hard scissors with the amount of energy they play. So this actually doesn't get one shot by anything in the format other than Victini right now, which is pretty funny. The obvious downside is the fact that you're playing Bronzongs, which are a bit clunky. But yeah, that's pretty funny. Interesting. I can't see too many. Well, I guess things like the Jolteons and the Dragapults really can't touch you as well, because you can just heal off all of their damage.
Sure. I mean, it's a 6-4 record, so I don't want to read into it too much. But yeah, Bronzong isn't super consistent in general, but you can see what they're trying to cash in on, right? You can see the mentality, where the format is.
Definitely. The Mallow Tourney was the penultimate one we'll take a look at. Again, another Jolteon list looking pretty consistent. This one playing the capture energies though. I don't know how common capture energies are in the build. I feel like they make sense, but obviously they're really good in the early game, right? Because they actually get you into the game, but they soft lock you out of Elemental Badge. Which can be annoying because Elemental Badge like covers that colorless cost, right? So you still have to attach the extra energy, which is something that if you're not playing them, you're basically always guaranteeing a lightning energy on turn 1 if you're attaching, and because of that, you can immediately start powering up something else. So you have to like double down into your first Jolteon, but it might mean that you get into the game more, which is interesting. I'm not sure how convinced I am. I like more energy cards, I guess. Just guaranteeing an attachment is good. But you've also, I guess the other thing is they've also cut into the lightning count as well, which is a bit spooky.
Yeah, I think normally you see like 7 and 3 Elemental Badge, or you see a count like this and play 2 Elemental Badge. That's normally like the split that I've seen. It's weird to play captures and then cut into your quick ball count. That's kind of odd to me. Because like you're adding in the captures to say that you want to hit more Pokemon, right? And then you're still cutting the quick ball. Which is a strange like space grab that you're going for.
It's so bizarre.
It's a bit of a way. It's counterproductive to your own theory to add in the captures if you're going to cut the space for the quick ball, right?
Well, another thing I was going to say is it's so bizarre that like pre-rotation, I don't remember seeing a single list that ever played less than 4 quick ball, and all of a sudden it feels like post-rotation, where I feel the format is less consistent. People have really started toying around with quick ball counts, and I don't want to say not been punished for it, but I don't necessarily know the mindset behind it, because it feels like ever missing a beat in this format is like game losing, and cutting into quick balls means you can miss beats.
It's a lot less of a no-brainer than it used to be, because no one plays Crobat or Eldegoss anymore, so it was never a late game like good card. Now it's like
That's
a
true.
late game thin card basically.
Yeah, that's true.
But I'm still my thought process is always my turn 1 and 2 hands.
Yeah.
I just think that will exponentially improve the rest of your game no matter what.
Yeah.
That it like the early
You'll get to that late game situation
curve
more.
you out Yeah, exactly. It curves you out so much better that I will always maximize like those sorts of cards first and never think twice about that. But again, it's a philosophy thing, I guess you could say. And they are dead late game. Like that's just a thing. Like when I play Shadow Rider, and then you have a hand of like 3 Fog Crystal, 4 Quick Ball or something, because you've found other outs early, and you're just like drawing into these, and they do nothing. It's really I get it, but I would still just play the 4.
Yeah.
Long story short, I'd still play
4. But yeah, the only list
actually beat Single Strike as well, which is interesting.
I would actually quite like to go back and
it was a 4 Urshifu Single Strike build as well, with the option to Laser Focus, and I think Laser Focus is like super good in this matchup.
Yeah, I can't see how a laser focusing Urshifu doesn't get away with like taking 4 prizes. But yeah, a lot of things can happen when when the format is the way it is.
Yeah.
The only list I want to take a quick look at is just the Eternatus list, because Eternatus has basically been non-existent for the past 2 weeks. Pretty much essentially due to Path's existence. This looks to be okay, and this makes sense as to why it's stuck around, because this is an Umbreon build managing to fit in 4 Tower of Darkness. So that makes sense as to being the way to build Eternatus right now. I think this is the only way to play Eternatus right now. Even managing to jam in the Moltres stuff is quite interesting. I feel like, in my mind at least, when we were discussing Eternatus builds post-rotation, before rotation happened, it felt like there was potential for this mishmash build, or it was going to be one or the other. And the mishmash build seemed way too inconsistent, but you have to play the Tower of Darkness and Umbreon stuff right now, I think. And so yeah, it's interesting that the Moltres, I guess, were justified in terms of still being good tempo.
Yeah, I've seen Moltres as the like pure Moltres builds with like Galar Mines or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like the best thing you could play, but Tower feels much better, and a fairly fit count of the Umbreon, and even a Quillfish that can draw you some cards, which is kind of funny. Quillfish being that card that you can Hiding Dark into and pass, right? If you just want to search out early, and when you have the high hiding count, you can actually like use it to be that sponge in the active that can make your opponent think twice about attacking it.
Yeah,
which is kind of funny.
Sets up one of these VMAXs, I guess.
Yeah, and the Lipard is really good right now as well. Makes a lot of sense. You can even see it going up to 2 count, the amount of tools are relevant in the game at the minute. So again, there's a lot of fear factor around Eternatus.
Yeah, I was going to say
very bad into Single Strike. That's like not changed whatsoever. And you're forced to put down all these nice 2 prize low hit point targets for these like Inteleon spread decks to mop up on. And even Sylveon is playing 1/1 Urshifu at the minimum count, and it feels like Urshifu can single-handedly like sweep you in a good amount of situations. So the meta's in a bad place for Eternatus, and even you have to like craft your deck in a weird way just to not lose to like Path on its own.
Yeah,
so.
I was going to say exactly that. Even off the back of all of that, you're playing 4 Tower of Darkness, you will still sometimes just lose to Paths, because one turn of Path, like even with for this build, you have to get rid of Path basically every turn, I feel, unless you're you've already kind of set a 3 prizer up and you're able to, like boss it up or whatever. But even then, you're leaning into the Umbreon, so you can't even boss. You only have the 1 boss for under Path. So even in this kind of build, hitting a Path deck is still going to be pretty scary. So yeah, it does feel like Eternatus is just hiding in the shadows, waiting maybe to be replaced by, I guess, Gengar VMAX next. I guess that'll be probably the biggest thing that will change, that might bring pure dark decks back. But right now, again, we don't even need them. We have a dark deck in a fighting deck, so we might as well just play the one that hits both weaknesses, I guess.
Sure.
And then rounding out the tournaments is this week's Sunday Open, which finished off today. Despite what you may think, this list that won was actually a Sylveon list. Playing a little bit of a less emphasis on the Sylveon and just going for 2/2 lines of all 3 of the sort of main Pokemon. Not playing the Moltres stuff, but instead playing as Aura, and as well as the Persimmon, because they're leaning into the bench sniping stuff a little bit better. So maybe, like you said, Joe, we have to think of a new way to play Urshi. Maybe this is just the way to play Urshi, and it just is a Sylveon deck now.
Right. Yeah,
and then you have the Persimmon, the Zeraora, and if you want to go into the bench, like damaging people's bench stuff. You have to go down this line now. But yeah, pretty interesting stuff. The quad, I think was it quad? Oh no, it was 3 spiral energy. So this was kind of, again, we don't really need to be scared of Shadow Rider too much right now, so you could get away with playing the quad or the all special energy build, but even so, this is kind of like a fine line of both, where you can still have access to stuff. But yeah,
you don't really want to attach a basic fighting to an Urshifu in that matchup. Like, if your only basics are just trying to Gale Thrust into Shadow Rider, I think you're still scooping. But sure, I don't see why you wouldn't just go full spiral and full capture.
Yeah, I'm going to say the one thing I would want to see is still obviously capture energy, because it feels like in every matchup it feels good because you're getting out. You're already playing such thin lines of stuff. Being able to tutor them out is hugely important.
But it's interesting to see the amount of like random guru, I guess you could say, where you don't have the same synergy.
There's no explicit synergy.
I guess like in this instance, you're like protecting boss, just a guaranteed game, and your opponent can't stop you is like such a good feeling to have, that I think like that alone warrants random guru being a consideration in like any list, basically. So yeah, I think, and obviously it has the minor synergy of being a different type coverage for Sylveon, so it makes that little bit of sense.
Yeah.
But I think in general, it's a consideration card for like any list, just because it's hey, you can't stop me winning kind of card, which is obviously very good.
But yeah, and then rounding out, there was another Rapid Strike Sylveon and another Ice Rider. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff. I don't think there's... I feel like I say, we're starting to see a pattern emerge in terms of what's doing well, what's really performing. You can see a couple of Suicunes just missing out. So Suicune still looks to be around. Interestingly, not too many Jolteons making it through to the latter stages of the tournament. Looks like there was only one that made it into the stage 2, which is interesting. But yeah, there's a Rapid Strike Mally in there as well. So there are still some points of contention where people are getting away with playing a variety of different things, but I do really feel like we're starting to see something form now.
Yeah, just looking at the metagame for the Sunday Open, just the most recent thing.
Yeah.
Interesting to see that Urshifu had quite a positive win rate.
Yes.
Just the 6% played, but over that 50% mark is really nice. Okay. So that's interesting to see, when I've just been slating it saying it has to like adapt or whatever, and it's still doing positive. So maybe it's there's enough. Well, there's not enough Draga and there's enough Jolteon, although Draga's still more popular than Jolteon. So not super sure. I mean, it's very good against Umbreon Urshi as well. I feel you force a one blow basically in that matchup. But
well, the other thing is, I feel like Urshifu can compete with Dragapult, whereas Jolteon just basically can't compete with Urshifu, right? So
yeah. True.
I feel like it's not as much of a clean win for one than the other. So, it still looks to be interesting. I didn't notice this when I was playing today, but I didn't realize that Zacian was the second most played deck, but it had a really poor win rate. 42% is very low.
Yeah, that's kind of surprising to me. I feel like the deck is stronger than the stats are showing. Personally.
I also didn't feel like it was as popular as the stats were showing though as well. I thought it was like down here, like sub 5% at this point. I thought there were other decks that were more popular in it. Well, interestingly, like the Sylveon build, the 14 Sylveon build is probably also like encompasses the Blazekins Aeroauras, the Urshifu Blazekins. So that probably is meant to be a little bit higher as well. But even so, I didn't expect Zacian to be second most popular.
I get why it is so popular, but I'm surprised it's performing so poorly. But like throughout the week, it's been performing worst out of like the top 5 decks that come to mind in the meta right now.
Do you still think it does break top 5?
Most decks have answers to it, right?
Yeah. Do you still think it breaks top 5? Do you think it's the 5th?
As in the strength of the deck?
Yeah. I think it's the 5th.
I think it's still probably the 5th best deck. The results are pretty bad here, but I would still probably play it over like behind 4 decks, and there wouldn't be many decks that.
Well, it would essentially be this top 5, right?
It. Yeah.
I guess Sylveon needs to be up here as well. Actually,
I like Leafeon. I like Sylveon. The Suicune build, I don't know if Ludicolo is correct. Personally, I'd be trying other Suicune builds. I really like Dragapult. Really like Jolteon. I think they're both fine. kind of worried about the uptick in single strike that we have been seeing. That's what opens the door for Leafeon to come back in a big way, I think. So that's what I'd be keeping my eye out for.
Yeah.
Going forward, I think like meta-wise, Leafeon makes a lot of sense, even though the numbers aren't great for Leafeon in this tournament.
Still, I'm surprised to see it was as popular as this. I felt like Leafeon had already dropped off for the past week or so that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, the results, it's dropped off a little bit in results, but I think the meta's winding back into a good spot for it.
Yeah, I agree.
For me. So we could see it becoming even more popular than this 5%.
It'll be interesting to see. I played Umbreon. I played Single Strike today, and I still think right now it would be what I'm playing, just because I do think like the only thing you're scared of in like the top 5 is a Suicune, I guess, that takes the first prizes, or
Sure.
like you say, that Leafeon. I feel like it can hold its own against basically like the majority of these other decks right here. I think Sylveon is the first deck I'm hyper scared of. Now Sylveon has well, it doesn't really show it here, but in the past few tournaments has had an exceedingly high win rate. So that is the biggest, like the scariest thing for me. It would probably be running into Sylveons in the latter stage of the tournaments. But I think Umbreon, well, I think Single Strike should be getting you into these top 32 brackets in a lot of situations, because it just has answers for basically everything above Sylveon right here. It can handle itself against pretty much everything.
Yeah, some of Sylveon's lowest win rate decks has been against Shadow Rider from at least this tournament we're looking at. So that's something to bear in mind. But I think Shadow Rider's kept in check anyway right now. So
yeah,
I think Sylveon's still very good. And yeah, I really enjoy Single Strike as a deck. I think it's fluid, it's got a clear game plan, and it's like the 50-50 deck, right? You can, like you said, against all the other decks in the game, you're pretty content, and you have a way in. So that's pretty nice.
It's a shame we don't have the matchup data for things like Sylveon and stuff, and to be able to see like across multiple tournaments where their win-losses have been. But hopefully Trainer here will be able to update their data soon, and we can start getting a bigger picture, and maybe we'll end up looking less at these lists and more at general uptick, like general trends of the meta. But yeah, other than that, unless there's anything else from you.
No, all good.
Alrighty, yeah, thank you very much for watching. We will be taking a look at next week's lists at the same time next week, so make sure you keep an eye out for that, and check out, we'll keep an eye on the channel this week for, obviously, we'll do 2 or 3 different decks, as we usually do, kind of based off of these results and seeing where things can go. I guess Leafeon may be one that we look at doing, trying to optimize Leafeon this week, so I would say keep an eye out for that. And yeah, other than that, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you guys next time. Cheers.